Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know there's a lot of similar faces that are in this session that were also in our industry breakfast this morning. So thank you for joining us. And today I'm pleased to have three panelists, Naresh from Liberty Mutual, Denise Rogers from Travelers, and then Monique Hessling. She's currently with Centerscope, but has a number of years of working in the insurance industry, and she also brings an international perspective to the panel as well. So I just want to, what we're going to do today is, I think for some of you, there's a few slides that are in here, just kind of like the industry priorities and big data. I'm going to quickly go through this and really get to the panel because we discussed some of this at the breakfast. Some of the top industry use cases, which you can see in the insurance industry spans both the life and the P&C. But really what we want to focus on today is the notion around how's real-time data, looking at open data sets, looking at skills, looking and leveraging our three panelists' insights and expertise on challenges, barriers, and overcoming barriers that we've seen in the industry. And I think we've got those in many different domains around barriers. There's both the technology, there's the skill set, there's data quality. It's understanding what type of data that we're trying to use. We've got legacy systems that we're still kind of decoupling, and what do we do with old data, but really how do we deal with some of the new data sets? And then also, I want to just highlight, and I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but there's a new industry big data certification. So similar to the CPCU, we have now called the AIDA, which is the Associate Insurance Data Analytics, which I actually found this to be quite interesting that the Institute now has this certification that's out there. And so if anyone's interested in it, I think it's worthwhile to, given the industry focus and so forth, maybe looking into the certification. So on that, I'm actually going to ask our panelists. So there's a lot of new data sources that are out there, whether it's in data.gov, there's third-party data sets, and so forth. How have your organizations looked at identifying new data sets to use?
I'll start. So can everybody hear me? So my role is an enterprise architect. And one of the things that we did late last year was we created the architecture for a discovery platform. But not only did we do that, we also created the notion that we had these different levels of, I want to call, data classification and data categorization. And by that I mean that our discovery platform is an area for data scientists to explore, to do prototypes, proof of concepts, all that good stuff, marrying known data and unknown data. So what we did was we created the notion that depending on the classification of that data set means that you will curate it in a certain way. So for a lot of the data sets that we wanted to bring in from the public sites like data.gov or any of the other public data sites, they would have a particular classification, they would have a certain amount of metadata wrapped around it, and it would be shareable. So any data scientist that wants to come in, that want to leverage it for the purposes of any kind of exploration or proof of concept, they would be able to look through that catalog, see those data sets there, and they're able to use it. So that's one of the things that we're working on. I've tested it out a bit where I brought in a data set from data.gov, and it's rich with metadata. So you know how they say, like in Hadoop, it's challenging to capture metadata, not so much with public data sets because they already have all that information wrapped around it.
Naresh, I know you've got kind of the life employee benefits perspective.
Sure.
And I know there's a lot of different data sets. How are you guys exploring and identifying new sets?
So it's very similar to how Denise has set the stage for us as well, right? She called us Discovery Platform, but it is more of an analytical sandbox is what we started doing it. This is where you're able to understand what data you needed, but quickly touch on outcome, right? That's the most important aspect of it. In the traditional world, in the new world, that's where your advantages come into play. You're able to actually look at the data, feel the data with metadata. Hey, what is the quality of data? Is it sufficient for me to actually take it beyond just the discovery phase of it, and use it if you are able to take it forward. And that also gave us the ability to look at, for the same data set, should we go to data.gov or some other third-party vendors for that matter, right? Depending on the type of needs, we went one way or the other. And using that analytical sandbox concept was key for us.
And Monique, I know you've worked internationally and then also worked for Accord as well. What are you seeing from an international perspective that kind of would maybe, and I know your focus is also on North America, what type of data sets are you seeing companies leveraging that are maybe different than, when you were doing, product development and so forth?
Yeah, I think we came an awful long way, of course, the last 5 years or so. 5 years ago, I ran product development for Zurich globally for personal lines. And I sat in a panel like this, and a whole bunch of, it was an Accord event, and a whole bunch of technical people asked, wanted me to talk about big data. And I said, I don't care if data is big, small, or ugly. And I find that, by the way, a very odd term, big data. I said, and frankly, I do not want to have to worry right now about somebody's phone communication with any one of our offices, because I cannot figure out who they're married to, how many kids they have, where they go to school, where they live, how many cars and homes they have. As long as I do not know that about my customer, don't talk to me about voice sentiment analysis and things like that. I don't want that. I just want what I need to do my work, right? And this is not that long ago. We were talking about it this morning. It's only like 4, 5, 6 years ago. So now go over to 2017, and I talked to a lot of insurance companies, and the majority of them by now have sort of a data science, analytical innovation sort of environment where they test, what can help them get a lift in analytical output, right, from new data sources and stuff. But they're also now, I think the culture is still to be very cautious with engaging in new data sources or allowing new data sources, because we all have been trained in classical data modeling and ETL kind of ways that it's expensive and time consuming and difficult. Hence, you need to make a business case to add a data source. That is not necessary anymore in the environment that we work in today. But people's minds are not totally there yet. So my storyline is always, there are tools and solutions, and the people that I tend to talk to happen to have a data lake, right? Otherwise I wouldn't be having meetings with them at that point in time. Like, there are very, quick and dirty, easy tools to at least start playing around with it. Don't make this overly complicated. If it doesn't work for you, throw it away. Who cares, right? We're not talking about massive ETL activities here. So to make a long story short, some carriers do, a lot of others don't. It's a cultural thing. I see them adding value. What most people start doing immediately all around the world is add geo information. That's the first step. I mean, almost everybody does that. And then it depends a little bit on what they're looking for. If they're looking at operational efficiency, anything that help with context around tax analysis would normally be the second one. If they're looking at products or profitable growth around telematics or smart devices for homes, etc., then it's either telematics or IoT kind of related data. So that's what they tend to look at. Most governments in the countries that we collectively represent here are pretty good at the moment at throwing a lot of data out there. But that's more still in the realm of data scientists playing around with it and seeing where the value is. That's not quite often in processes, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and I know one thing I've noticed, and I had this like weird thing. I typically go out to data.gov and see how many, like constantly looking at how many new data sets that are out there. And there's some that are, the data quality is just atrocious. And I've started to notice that over probably the last 3 to 6 months, the number of data sets has kind of like decreasing a little bit.
Yes, I noticed
because
that too.
of people I think have been complaining about the data quality, and they're like, okay, I'm going to take that data set down. And so it's just interesting to watch, that it's no longer just, well, let me go publish this, new open data set, and it's like, well, that's worthless. So it's good to see that some of the, the municipalities and so forth are, pulling data sets down. And I will tell you guys, one of the most interesting items that I've seen put out there is restaurant inspections. And just how insightful some of that data is. So, but Denise, you touched a little bit on the aspect of the processes that and all of you really did. It's like from a data governance perspective, and you've identified some areas, Denise, but do you fundamentally see, should there be a difference in the data governance processes that we use for external, third-party, or internal data sources?
Yeah, I think it should be a little bit different, treated differently, because I think that the external data sources, they're out of our control. They were created for a particular purpose, and we're trying to leverage that, right? So I think that we can't personally put that extreme rigor that we do with our own internal data sets, because we don't own it. So, but we have to be able to have some confidence that the data that we're going to be using, whether it be for training a model or anything like that, does meet some minimum requirements. So a lot of the things that we've started the conversation around is what would be that minimum set of data quality requirements that we need to, that these external data sets or public data sets need to adhere to. And they're definitely going to be different than what we generate internally, for sure. So, and that's how we've been looking at it.
Okay.
And we curate it differently.
Okay. So now as we start to think about, different type of, maybe the IoT, the sensors and so forth, and we've got, varying degree of adoption and so forth, and this is more probably a future forward-looking statement. Impact of, truly using real-time data that's coming into the enterprise, and the shift or potential shift in mindset. What do you guys see as the potential challenges with, maybe from a business and from an IoT perspective, that, hey, I've got streaming real-time data that's going to be coming in every sub-second, and managing that, and that's just not within our core culture of the insurance industry. Thoughts on, what can we do to prepare ourselves?
So it's funny that you bring up that question, because one of the things that we're trying to do, especially in enterprise architecture, working with my IT partners and business partners, is to change the mindset that says we don't have to structure the data before we can analyze it. Mm-hmm. We have to get the data in the hands of the data scientists and data analysts as quickly as we can. Our architectural solutions have to support that. So it's really about the notion of shifting a mindset from saying structure, ingest, then analyze, and switch it around to be ingest, analyze, and then structure. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see little sparks of, yeah, that makes sense, because the sooner that we can get the data in the hands of the data scientists to figure out, is this something that we can work with or not, we're seeing we're starting to turn the corner to say, let's just worry about getting the data in, wrap some initial metadata rules around it, where it came from, just really fundamental, very, very light metadata until we figure out what we want to do with it. But there are pockets that are still hanging on to that 90s warehouse relational mindset, but I have confidence that they'll change.
Got it.
To that extent, the schema on read is the concept that we were all going to be following. But when you talk about real-time, IoT is only one part of the challenge, right? The internal eventing, the streaming mechanism that we are all going towards, the streaming architecture, if you will, right? Creating these microservices-based models, understanding the data events is a critical component of it. Yes, we are ready to consume all those things. We just saw SDF 3.0. I can do streaming analysis on top of it, but how do you even understand the business entity that is coming in? That's where, are we ready? Yes, we are, but for every system that will change. So you got to be making sure that IoT is probably the easiest aspect of it in real-time consumption, because you know what kind of data you're getting in. The internal systems is where we need to have more focus on understanding what events cause what data message will come out. And that's where your frameworks, the profiling frameworks or the quality frameworks that you probably are referring to anyways, right? That will come into play. And how do we curate the data will also be in the play.
Yeah. And Monique, I know you're seeing all different types of data sets. And what are you seeing from a...
from a streaming or
yeah.
real time? Yeah, I think this is one where we need to help each other between the business IT and the solution providers and you, amongst other people. Because this is one of those, we don't know what we don't know, right? And the business gets asked all the time to come up with business cases and use cases and including an ROI on these kind of concepts that we're talking about right now. And it's very difficult for a lot of people because they have not been trained, as I think Denise said, on what you could do with these kind of things, and it's foreign to them. But there are use cases out there, and I think we all need to do a better job to help each other understand those use cases and share them. What I have seen people being fairly successful with, and I'll stick to a telematics example because that part of the industry is relatively advanced compared to others, is we had an example of a carrier that noticed that, somewhere in Europe, that noticed that a significant part of their population in a certain geography got dinged suddenly for worse driving behavior. And it had to do with harsh braking. And it was all in the same part of a big city in Europe. And it took them a lot of time in the classical way of analysis to figure out why all those people, collectively, all of us here in the room, suddenly became worse drivers. That does not make a lot of sense, right? Unless we all hang at the party too long yesterday. What happened, they started streaming in real-time video of what was happening on those roads. And it turned out there was a big construction project going on in one part of the city that forced people to do some weird movements, that forced people to hit the brakes suddenly because they put those speed bumps in that nobody expected because they weren't there 2 days ago, right? These kind of things. And it's a very easy use case that helped them price people much more appropriate than what their algorithms would told them to do. And it was actually a very easy use case to make. But it's one of those, we didn't know what to ask for until we took a look at it, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So yeah, so my storyline on that is, and it's all around the world, that the questions that I get most deal with use cases and impact. And I know you're collecting them. Right. And I think, again, collectively, we all need to do a much better job on educating each other on what works and what doesn't work. And it's not a competitive advantage, because that's the insurance comment, right? I mean, I cannot tell you that, because then you know that we price people based on speed bumps in Germany. Well, you should. We all should. So.
Yeah, and then that is, I mean, just when you think about, you know, some of the more real-time and different data sources, having the full context behind them, I mean, can just lead to obscure decisions. And I think it's good to kind of like, let's play around with these things before maybe we have them start to impact, you know, pricing and rating and how we handle and settle claims and people. So, because there's going to be so many different variations. And I was actually talking to, you know, from an internal perspective, you know, just the aspect of more real-time information is talking to a group of underwriters, and this I think is also was in the Willis Towers Watson survey. And if you guys haven't downloaded these, I would highly recommend, if you're in the PNC side, I mean, I know I'll send out these data sources, but there's some pretty insightful commentary around this as well, is just thinking about claims. And, you know, we get into this little isolation of, well, that's my data, and I don't want to share that information except at a high level with underwriting. And people in underwriting go, well, I might have made a different decision in underwriting if I'd actually seen that aggregated claims data. So I think there's also the balance of, you know, how do I, you know, better share, you know, up-to-date information around claims and so forth, especially in the event of cat losses. So, I mean, we've talked a little bit about data and so forth, and I think, you know, we've got the cultural, you know, some of the other barriers or skills and so forth. Naresh, what have you been, you know, how do you guys go about identifying, you know, good, how do you make data people just don't grow up?
They don't.
You know. So,
So what do you mean they don't grow up?
well, they grow up, but maybe they're just, you know, are you born that way? You know, it's kind of like.
Do you stay in kindergarten forever?
I'm going to clone.
I guess that's kind of tying into some of those, you know, logos on the T-shirts out there. What is it? Ice data. Yeah. So it's kind of like some interesting themes there, but just kind of.
That's an old song. You should remember that.
You can tell I've known her for a while, right? I'm like, okay, that's 2 jabs right now, Monique.
Ever more, right?
You know what payback's like. So anyway, Naresh, on the skills.
Right. So it's a constant struggle for, I think, the whole industry, not just for insurance in general, right? That the kind of talent, it's not that talent doesn't exist, but it's too many people trying for the same talent at the same time. And what we are actually, I think most of the people are also doing in that particular sense is grooming our own talent with, you know, these cool kids coming out of the freshers. That way, putting in a proper rigor in terms of how do we train them, how do we motivate them, and how do we empower them to make sure that they can reach to the level. Obviously, there is an investment time in that particular sense, but that is what we have to do. The market is in such a crazy mode that it's not easy at all, and it's hurting for the most part. You know, every time we make an offer, we probably have 3 competing offers. Right? That's not helping. But at the same time, having some trainings done internally and continue to have this mentoring sessions is what we do. I especially do within my own organization to make sure that the people are coming here are actually motivated and then learning the skills very quickly.
What are you seeing, Denise? I mean, around program and, you know, development of skills and so forth.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're seeing is there's so much to learn. I mean, it's just like this ocean of stuff. And our approach to travelers is we wanted to focus the training around roles. So if your role is a data engineer, here's the path of stuff that you need to focus on learning. If you're a data scientist, if you're an infrastructure engineer, because there's just so much stuff. One of the things I learned earlier on is that the success of this platform, of this technology, and to get enterprise-wide adoption is the tools that are part of the ecosystem have to be used appropriately. And depending on your role, you use a certain set of tools. So what we've done is we've created an education program that is focused on those roles. And not only is it focused on those roles and everything's moving so fast, within each one of those areas, we have online training because stuff is just happening so fast. And then we have in-class learning where we have, you know, an instructor-led situation and they can do labs and all that good stuff, right? So, but it's really focused around the roles. There's so much out there that we organize it such that we can get that enterprise-wide adoption, training our existing staff, and we get people to be that much more productive, that much more quicker.
So I guess creating any subway maps kind of thing where there is commonality between data scientists and a data engineer.
Yeah, and it's that blurring too, because it's not just business and IT anymore, black or white, it's gray. And that's why focusing on the role is really gonna produce those benefits that we're gonna see.
Got it. Have you started to see any movement of people going, well, you know, this is my role now, but I want to go into another role and so forth, so kind of like, you know, looking at, you know, their career path and so forth?
Oh yeah, people are starting to think about, well, you know, I'm in IT, but I'm really interested in data science and machine learning. And then we see on the business side where I really want to munge the data and get that dirt under my fingernails to figure out how to create data products. So we're starting to see that evolution happen, of course.
Monique, what are you seeing on the business side? I know before you said it's like data, it's like get rid of the big and so forth.
That was a couple of years ago. Yeah, there are a couple of good things happening and then 1 or 2 maybe not so good. There are a lot of schools now that start having classes or majors, I guess you call it, that include what you just said, that crossover between the business and IT. So they're looking at data science or informatica, not informatica as a profession, not as a company, not from like a purely mathematical computer science field, but they incorporate business school and economics classes. And people are graduating from these schools now. I know a couple of those I tend to refer to them as kids, and they're really not. They're young adults, right? But so I think that is a good thing. There is an interesting story on that. I think it's also a very global field. One of those studies started in a small town in the Netherlands, middle of the Netherlands, less than 100,000 people. The name of the town is Sertogenbosch, and I pronounce it in a fairly English way. Nobody could pronounce it otherwise. And the first 2-3 years of students that came up there were almost all foreign, and almost all came from Asia. And the only reason that they would go to school there, or that they would end up in that town, is for that school. There is really no other reason, trust me, for anybody to be there. If
it's not for the tulips?
It's not full of, it's full of cows, pretty much. It's, but so I think there's a lot of movement on the education side and the training and development side, both in companies as well as in the university system. The bad way that us as carriers tend to do still, and especially if you're in an area where it's hard to find talent, like the Midwest of the United States in some locations or some countries in Europe, we try to protect very strictly what we have as talent. And we do that in some cases by splitting up responsibilities so that people can cross-train and can learn. So I have one carrier that I work with in the Midwest, and he has a couple of data scientists, and he said, I will only let that guy look at P&C stuff because there are a couple of life companies in town and I don't want them to hire him away from me. And I think that sort of defeats a little bit of the purpose of data science if we start working in that way. So I always highly recommend not to do that. I can understand the sentiment, right? So that is, I thought, a not so pleasant trend that I'm seeing.
Okay, interesting. So lessons learned. I mean, what you guys, and then I'm going to go out and open it up for questions and so forth.
Sure. So I think one of the questions that was asked in the breakfast this morning is the business adoption of everything that we are doing as well, right? How are we doing it? Especially what we do, everything is on cloud, so it's fancy, but people don't understand it, right? So just, I didn't answer the question in the morning, but I will now. We made sure that our business partners are given the same kind of tools that they are using, right? That they use it to use in the old legacy world, like any of the SQL tools or the query tools that they've been using, just to make sure that the switchover is easier for them. Right? Otherwise, if I can throw in a Hue or another pieces on top of them, it's scary, right? And every time they Google for Hadoop, they'll find HDFS is a file system, and the first question that they'll ask me is, what am I doing with the file? That's how it is. So we made sure that the lessons learned for us in that particular space was to make sure that the business adoption grows quicker. We need to give them the same kind of tools to begin with. And once they are on board, it's easier for us to introduce new tools. So we are actually now rolling out Zeppelin as an analytical sandbox for them, just because now they are very comfortable looking at what they have already. So, business, unless you monetize your data lake, unless you make sure that you are able to take this platform to the next level, you will struggle. So you need to make sure that the business is there all the time, taking advantage of the new data sets that are coming in. That's our biggest lesson in that.
I think for us here at Travelers it's just what you're saying is, what's the business case? What's the business problem? What's the business question that we're solving for? Because our first, in a confession here, our first journey into this space was, this is a really cool, shiny new penny. Let's go take a look. And we were so into looking at the technology that, it's almost like, let's focus on a POC and then find a business case for it. And now what we're doing is actually shifting that whole approach to say, what are the business capabilities that you're doing now what you would want to enhance? What are some new things that you're thinking about or things that you're not thinking about? And then we as architects and designers and coders and all this good stuff will architect and develop a solution. That solution we are viewing as a product that will evolve over time as well. And the way we approach it is, and now we understand it doesn't have to be perfect because the technology is moving so quickly. So we've adopted a mindset of the first time we do anything, we go in with what we call an MVP or a minimally viable product, and then we evolve it over time. So that was huge for us.
And Monica, what are you seeing from, I know you're in kind of a different capacity or a different role now versus what you've seen.
Yeah, I see two best practices, and actually you pointed them sort of out. One is, you know, you get easier support and it gets most focused when you have a business case and you want to fix something. But sometimes that's hard because, again, you don't know what you have. You have that bright, shiny penny or whatever it is, and you don't know what to do with it, but you still know that there's something somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So the best practice that I see is that the carriers that have they quite often call it an innovation center or whatever they call it, where they set a little bit of funding and resources aside, you know, and quite often on a small cluster to play around and just figure out what they don't know and what they could benefit. And then very quickly, they also stack up an operational environment when they work on those business cases that make value, that create value. And one of the quickest case studies that I have seen was of a CIO who had a 2,000 people IT department, and he said, I'll just test everything operational in my own area as it is a business unit, right? I have billing too in my IT department, and I have, you know, human resources too, and all that kind of stuff. So he used his own area as a pilot area for the operational business case kind of things, combined with a more like an innovation kind of play role. I think that was a really good best practice. I think at least it worked very successfully for him. So.
Got it. So I'm going to open it up for questions for the panel, and as long as we keep them away from competitive questions, I think they're pretty much good with answering. Wait, give you the mic.
So you guys talked about so much data, don't focus on getting it organized, just get it in quickly. How do you help the organization? So insurance, it's all about, you know, making really great risk-averse decisions. How do you help the organization get comfortable with that approach? Really quickly playing around with data without having a lot of insight into it.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah,
You go first.
Let's just try it. You know, we have environments at Travelers where we can just do that. Let's try it and prove it out. You know, what were some of the pitfalls on this particular approach? What things worked well? And that's new for a lot of us in the industry where this whole concept of, they call it fast to fail, they have all kinds of labels for it. But at the end of the day is, let's just kick the tires a bit, see what it's like, and then have this way of experimenting, and then if it passes that stage, you go to a prototype, a POC, and then, oh, maybe we should implement this in production. But it's just really about experimenting and trying it.
A different way is test and learn, right? Essentially, I mean, every organization calls it differently. You know, we probably call it as test and learn. But the whole aspect of, with the millennials coming in, and insurance cannot be that same risk-averse anymore, right? It used to be, we need to take certain corrective actions in how we look at new data elements to understand, or the new data sets for that matter, to understand what should we do to make sure that we are able to reach this new generation of folks. Right? That's been in the industry for a long time now, but we are only acting now. So test and learn is the philosophy. New data, that's the advantage of these platforms. You try, you get it, you don't like it, you trash it out, right? There's nothing lost, no time lost as well. Probably a couple of hours here and there, nothing more.
Yeah, pick areas that are not career threatening for people, right? When you ask people to take risks on new things in insurance companies, which is not what we all are collectively trained and educated to be. I mean, it's not the most high-risk people that end up in our industry normally, right? So I like to find areas that only have an upswing and not a downswing, like segmentation, new product development. It's really hard to play with data in that kind of an environment and totally screw it up to the degree that it will threaten your career seriously. If you go for operational efficiency, or if you go for areas in ops that will potentially cost people's jobs or so, those are ugly areas. So stay away from those in the beginning. And the second thing is, I think Denise mentioned it, I think you guys both did, find people that like this stuff. There are people that like to play with this stuff. And quite often they are millennials, but they're also like old people that like this stuff, right? And then the third is find an interface that allows the end user to actually play with the data. Don't have them depend on data scientists and have the data scientists run all the work for them. Just find a tool, find a solution. There are plenty of them out there by now that allow the end user or at least the business analyst to play with it themselves, and give them some time to do that. That's it.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Hi, we talked about the change from starting from a technology and then finding a business use case versus start from a business use case and then see how you solve that problem, right? So can you describe some of those top business use cases that are being solved or you think will be solved in the 1 to 2 years going forward in the insurance industry?
So everything that Cindy is showing up are all the use cases that will be solved in the next 1 or 2 years for sure. So that's the simplest answer, but in all honesty, when we say technology pushing use cases to business versus, hey, business asking, I have a use case that can be solved this, it is now both ways, right? Insurance, insurtech, the new word, the buzzword that is changing the way industry it is. It is not about business only looking at business as it is. It is technology looking, having that business appetite, and business having technology appetite to make sure that they find the middle ground on what are the use cases that business can think of and what are the use cases from an industry perspective that we can think and push forward. But obviously, I can't exactly say what are all the use cases that will solve. Cindy and kind of work offline on some of those things, but there will be many cases that will be solved.
I would actually say first thing to do is look at your financial statement, see if where you're at with your competitors, where there's some challenges, and if there's a way that data and the analysis of data can actually help you, have an impact on your financials.
I think the low-hanging fruit tends to be at the moment if we're talking P&C, right? It's different for the life folks. But for P&C, it tends to be on the claims analytics side. That's where I see most business cases being made successfully at the moment. And that's also where I see most use cases that lead to measurable improvements. Cindy had 1 or 2 examples this morning. We have other ones that sort of show that claims is a very structured business function, and obviously they code claims causes and claims outcomes in a preset, in the classical way, or we all used to do it, right? In a preset variable system. Quite often the actually true information that we all want to know about and analyze is in the claims notes, which is unstructured text forms or pictures, that kind of stuff. When we started analyzing those, and those are use cases that I see a lot at the moment, we see companies figure out that an X percentage of their claims causes significantly more than X percent in total losses because of some reasons that they didn't know. Example being, I'll give you an American example, a big US company, their regional execs in the Southeast, the Atlanta area, greater Atlanta area, came to the conclusion when they started to do tax analysis that a couple of million in dollars, think about this, we're talking to significant cash here, a couple of millions in dollars every winter was caused by heat lamps in dog houses. Now, we all think that is, let me tell you, that is not an actually preset code on the claims form. There is not one code that says heat lamps in dog houses. So that ended up in the all other. And what happened, people were concerned that in the winter their dogs would get cooled in the rural area. So they put a heat lamp in the dog house. The dog knocks the lamp over, or bad things happen, thing goes on fire, house goes on fire, and it created between $6 and $9 million every winter in losses, specifically this thing. I would never have thought, first of all, I would never have thought that people would put heat lamps in dog homes, especially not in Atlanta. But I would never have thought that that would be an issue. I mean, I would not know to look for that until we started playing around with the data in a lake and figure this out. But those are the business cases that I actually, at this point in time, see a lot of around claims. On the life side, I see them a lot of process improvements on the forms, making sure that forms are in good order, complete, the whole file is okay. That kind of stuff I see more on the life and annuity side. So. Did you know the heat lamp thing?
No, I didn't know about that. That's good. I learned something.
Heat lamps.
Earlier, you had talked about the use of roles for development, training, in your staff development. Where did you start with getting those role definitions and defining those roles in terms of capabilities, in terms of competencies, in terms of responsibilities to start that process?
So is your question about how did we start, what was our approach to figuring out the roles? So it was really about the data journey and what has to happen to the data at any given point in order to make that data product available for whether it be downstream consumption or analysis. And what we did was, as we looked at the journey of that data, it was like, well, this has to happen to the data, and this is what has to happen to all that good stuff. And from that, what we distill from that is these different roles. So there's a role that says, I need to get the data, and I need to curate it, or I need to triage it such that it's ready for transformation, whether it be integrating it with other data sets, right? So what we saw coming out of that was, well, we need to engineer the data, ergo the data engineer. Or back in the day, which was like maybe a couple of years ago, they call it data wrangler. I don't even know what it's going to evolve into, but that's how we figured out that we needed a data engineer role. And we came up with definition for it, and so on and so forth. The same thing with the data analyst. And data analyst could be not somebody from business or somebody from IT, but what are the things that have to happen to the data such that you can conduct a complete analysis of it. And that's how we figured out that we need a data scientist / data analyst role. So that's really, it was about the journey of the data.
Got time, and we're already running past, but I know there was one more question back here, and I think we'll take that.
I know this question could be an entire conference in its own, so I'm not looking for that, but we all have systems that have been in place since the 60s and the 70s that have been there forever, and our businesses are crucial. They can't run without them. They can't be removed. The technology is changing so quickly. The talent pool is so limited. We're all still figuring this out. Where are you in your journey in establishing best practices for your architectural design? I don't want to build stovepipes as a service. I want to build foundations that can go forward. Maybe they won't go forward 50 years, maybe they can at least go forward 5 years, but where are you in that process of defining architectural best practices and approaches to doing this? Or is it still just we make it up as we go every time we build something new?
I'll start. So I would say that we're foundational. We have established a couple of Hadoop platforms, and what essentially those platforms will support from a capability perspective. And what we've been doing, as I said earlier, we're not in the business of working on projects. We're in the business of developing products. And because of that, we are thinking like 12 to 18 months, 2 years tops, and what those platforms, what those capabilities will evolve into over that time space. And so we've just started a journey. So we've stood up 2 platforms, so it's really foundational at this point. The next release of these products will include other capabilities that we can build upon the foundation that we've established.
So just to add on top of that, the first architecture principle that I have written is build something for change, right? The industry is changing a lot. Obviously, everything that we will build going forward is going to change. So don't be so confined to a particular tool or a technology. You should think about building for change. At the same time, with MVP that Dennis just referred to, with Agile, with all the processes that are coming to play, you need to have your vision, and you need to have the iterative development environment, right? You know, what do you make sure? How do you get there? Your vision. How do you achieve your vision? There's an incremental approach versus an iterative approach. Iterative approach is what will take you very close to your vision. So that's what becomes your architecture enablers, and make sure that you have the plan of action coming together to achieve your vision as such.
Well, thank you for being on the panel. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.